My name is Serafina the Masked Lady. I was once human. Since then, I have lived many lives. I have been loved and reviled, adored and despised, been the child of a poor prostitute and a courtesan revered by thousands. When I was a child, a stranger with no face offered me the ability to move between the worlds. Since then, my every death has led to a new life. I once had a true love. He was ripped away from me when I was murdered in the 18th century. I search for him still. In the meantime, I walk in the shadows behind the universe, visiting realms both exquisite and terrible and bringing back stories and rhymes to amaze the mind and enchant the ear. Through my YouTube channel, I send the stories out into the world, hoping that my true love will hear them and reply. Hoping, if he does not, that I will find in the other souls who listen kindred spirits to help ease the pain. What of you, stranger? Did you come here tonight seeking a mystery? Do you hunger for a spark of excitement, for the dark thrill of fear? Will you listen as my tales unfold, knowing that some may very well take on lives of their own? Consider, stranger, whether you have the courage to walk between the worlds with Serafina the Masked Lady. Hello, my delicious darlings. I am so pleased to see you all here tonight. How have you been since we last met? This week, I have been staying home and hiding from the awful weather. I don't know about where you live, but I have been experiencing all the joys of freezing rain. Luckily, last week's snowdrops seem to be holding up well, and their beautiful colors are even more radiant against the gray sky. That, and I have been able to keep my snuggly pajamas out of mothballs for a while longer. Thinking about the cold reminded me of another story set in the winter. Unlike some of our previous tales, it is not set in the past or on the snowy roof of the world. No, the story is set in the present day, and it's about a group of young people trying to survive a winter that's about to turn genuinely deadly. The story is longer than usual, so I have tried a new tactic. Today, we will share the first half of the story. The second half will appear in our next video. Feel free to let me know what you think of the new structure and the story. Here we go. A reflection on death. Part 1. Chapter 1. I couldn't tell you when our pod first spent a night in the old bathroom by the canal. Sally came up with the word pod. We needed a collective noun for our group, and she thought it less trite than gang or fam. Sally is the youngest member of the family, and all of us spoil her. She likes dolphins. Dolphins travel in pods. The rest, as you might say, was history. I can tell you that, although we returned many times after that, it was always reluctantly. We call the place the Pit. No name could be more apposite. The council had built the rectangular concrete structure in the 1960s and furnished it with the best that shoddy plumbing and avocado tiles could offer. Initially, it had been separated into gents and ladies sections, but the dividing wall had been torn down long before any of us had been born. A chipped plastic sign stating all genders had been glued to the exterior door. The internal setup hadn't changed much since then. A wall of grubby urinals ran down one side of the structure. 5 dented, graffiti-daubed cubicles containing lidless and often blocked toilets occupied the other. Over time, the city had hired various attendants to clean and maintain the place. The poor souls had spent most of their time scrubbing toilets or stuck in an office no bigger than a closet. Sadly, one too many of them got beaten up by drunks or run off by druggies. Eventually, the council stopped trying to fill the position. These days, cleaning was done in-house. For that read rarely at all. The city council could have closed the pit down. But paradoxically, it was cheaper to keep it open than allow it to be condemned. So there it had sat, on the cracked concrete path next to the sluggish green canal, gradually growing uglier and uglier. For us, it was a last resort. Sleeping in the pit was gross. Decades of human bodily functions had left the air foul. It was a struggle to decide whether to breathe through the nose, making your eyes burn, or through the mouth, risking infection by the invisible miasma that lurked there. The plumbing was a nightmare too. In the 60s, it had been bad. These days, the urinals dripped, the roof leaked, and at least one of the loos was cracked clean through. The rubbish bins overflowed, and the floor, walls, and ceilings were all patterned with black mold. Most dangerous to us were the drug dealers. They didn't come a lot. Even scum have some standards. But the canal is isolated, and the police seldom come here. Hence, they occasionally use it for their less savory business. I've had a couple of close calls with the hard men. Luckily, they were content to brandish their weapons and tell me to leave. It could easily have been worse. Kids disappear from the streets all the time. Some of them turn up in the canal bound and bruised, their empty lungs declaring that they died before being thrown in. You can probably understand why we try to steer clear of the pit. Ultimately, however, even bunking down in a place that turns the stomach is better than dying from cold. I was 17 on the night that the strangeness started. By then, I knew the pit as well as the back of my burned right hand. Sally, the youngest of our group, had turned 14 in early December. We'd stayed out late on her birthday celebrating. She'd been sick ever since. It was the second night in January, and the temperature outside had dipped below freezing for the second time in a row when we finally, reluctantly, decided to brave the pit again. It was that where we watched Sally die in front of us. There were 5 of us that night. At its largest, our pod had numbered 10, but one girl, Mara, had found herself a home. 4 others, Ben, Mick, Tara, and Jane, had perished over the winter. 3 had died in my arms. The surviving members of the pod were myself, the boys Dane and Charlie, and 2 girls, Sally and Megs. Chapter 2. Once inside the pit, I quickly scouted a resting space for Sally. The best place to sleep was on the left-hand side, under the long defunct hand dryers. If brave enough to shift the metal dustbin, you could access a 5 by 5 foot square of tile with no black marks or suspicious fluid puddles. Together, we cleared the area and put down the dirtiest of our duvets to form a pad. That done, we ushered the girls over to it. We surrendered one of our 2 pillows to support them and used 2 more blankets, mine and Dane's, to cover them. With that done, we proceeded to lessen the awfulness of the place as much as we could, emptying sinks, flushing loos, and liberally spraying the cans of Febreze that Megs carried in her rucksack. Finally, we cleared off places where the rest of us could settle and used the bin to wedge the front door closed. I had the worst sleeping place as usual. A sliver of cold tile only 6 inches from the last urinal. Bijou bed space, I thought. Own running water. Scenic view of urinal cake. The sarcasm almost made me smile. I could have pulled rank. If our pod had anything as prosaic as a leader, I was it. The problem was that I'd cared for the kids for years. I never said it out loud, but I saw them as mine. Maybe they knew it, because they pretty much ran roughshod over me. More fool me, I let them. Point of fact, my hands were bright red and covered in chilblains because my only pair of gloves were warming Dane's fingers. I had hung my coat up to dry soon after entering the pit. Melting snow had soaked through the thick flannel jacket, turning the ordinarily warm garment into a dripping burden. Draping it over a stall door meant there was half a chance it would be dry come morning. That left me with only a thin t-shirt and hoodie to keep out the chill. I was shivering. I know that. In truth, not shivering is worse. It suggests a body succumbing to hypothermia. Nonetheless, the trembles weren't welcome. I could hear the wind screaming outside. Snow was piling up against the barred windows. I thought of the last Christmas I had spent with my mother. before my drunken stepdad had blundered in and ruined it. I wished I could provide a Christmas like that for my pod. I thought about how beautiful snow must seem when viewed from a warm, secure home. Bitter longing welled up inside me, making my hands tremble. Chapter 3. Sally saw the girl first. She had stopped talking some time ago and was lying with her head on the pillow. Her eyes were half closed. Part of me wanted to shake her awake, but I decided against it. She was sick. Dragging her back to awareness now would be cruel. Megs had her arms around Sally, sharing her warmth. When Sally first joined us, Megs had adopted her as a younger sister. Their relationship had strengthened since. I hope to God that Sally recovered from her illness. I loved her, but Megs adored the child with her whole being. I didn't think she would survive losing her. I shook my head. No kid deserves the mountain of crap that comes from living on the streets. But if any of us genuinely deserved a better life, then it was Sally. She was the sweetest, gentlest, most thoughtful girl in creation. We would all have given up our chance of a home to give her one. To begin with, I didn't notice the change in Sally's expression. Only when she sat bolt upright, whining through her nose, did I recognize her distress. "Sally," I asked, "what is it?" She didn't answer. She just yelped again and began to cry. I was up and beside her in a moment. I put my hand on her forehead. She was burning with fever. Sally didn't move. She didn't even seem to notice my presence. I scanned the pit. The rest of the pod were watching anxiously. "Sally." I tried to keep my voice calm. "Sally, it's Luca. I'm here." Sally said, "I can see." "What can you see?" "There's a girl. A girl in the mirror." "Which mirror?" I asked. She pointed to the last cracked glass rectangle, the one that was closest to the door. "That one." She nodded. By the widening of her eyes, I could tell that whatever she saw frightened her. "What does she look like?" "Is she old?" "Young." "Ghost," Sally said. "Oh." I won't say that I immediately disbelieved her. When you live on the outskirts of society, you tend to see things that normal people would dismiss out of hand. Besides, Sally didn't lie. She was almost painfully honest, and I could see the sincerity of the terror in her eyes. On the other hand, she was ill. Fevers could do strange things to you. They could make you hear and see things that weren't there. Hesitantly, I walked towards the mirror. It was in a bad state. There was a large crack in the lower left-hand corner. The glass was mottled with patches of green. Apart from that, there was nothing strange about it. I inspected the wall behind it and looked over the screws that fastened it to the concrete. Back when I was living in a children's home on the far side of the city, I saw the film Candyman. I'd never forgotten the image of him bursting through a mirror to slash at his victims with his hook. Nor had I missed the fact that a similar murder had occurred in real life when thieves had battered their way into an apartment through a corridor behind a medicine cabinet. Since then, the police advised renters to check their apartments for hidden cubicles and tunnels, for anything that might allow a dangerous stranger to hide out of sight. I doubted that anyone would want to hide behind the walls of a disgusting toilet block structure. But that didn't mean that I shouldn't check it out just in case. I pressed my hands to the mirror and the wall around it. There were no hidden hinges, no tilt, no echo when I tapped it. The sound was low and flat, suggesting that what lay behind it was just what I had expected: moldering concrete blocks. There was no strange creature in the mirror, only a thin young man with a stubble-dusted chin and haunted gray eyes. "Is she still there?" I asked. When I glanced over my shoulder at Sally, she shook her head. I tapped the mirror again. "Well, I don't think she will harm us. Let me know if you see her again, okay?" Sally nodded, but big fat tears still hung in her eyes. Do you want Doc to give you one of his sleeping pills? I asked. Sally seemed tempted, but eventually she shook her head. Okay, try to rest. I'll be here if you need anything. Chapter 4. Dane saw the girl next. He was standing at the furthest sink, attending to his toilet. He had pulled his battered toothbrush out of its plastic case and used his last dab of toothpaste to clean his mouth. Dane had something of a fixation on oral hygiene. I understood why. Dane was a naturally clean person. Sadly, living without a permanent home made it hard to take regular baths. Over time, we had all gotten semi-used to our body odor. Although at times, the smell would strike me anew, and I would blush in humiliation. Our mouths were one thing we could keep clean relatively cheaply. Dane made full use of that little bit of control. He was the one who reminded all of us to use our toothbrushes and happily shared his small boxes of floss. Dane kept our medicines. Nothing hard, just bandages, plasters, paracetamol, and a few precious potent sleeping pills. That was how he had got his nickname, Doc. Dane was careful to issue the medicines only when absolutely necessary. We had seen people destroyed by drugs, some younger than us, and we didn't want to descend that slippery slope. Anyway, I digress. Dane was brushing vigorously, doing a shuffling dance to a song on his internal radio when he suddenly stopped. At first, I thought he'd slipped, maybe turned an ankle. Doc, I called. Hey, Doc. What's going on? Dane moaned again. His eyes were darting from side to side, but they were drawn inexorably back to the mirror. No, he said. No, I won't listen. I don't want to hear you. Go away. And then he collapsed. There was a flurry of motion as Charlie and I darted towards him, tugging him away from the sinks and into the middle of the room. A quick check showed me that he was still breathing, and the pulse in his wrist was slow and steady. Luckily, Dane's faint didn't last long. Within 5 minutes, he was awake again and talking. Hey, Doc, I said. What happened? Dane blinked. I was brushing my teeth, he said, and I thought I saw someone in the mirror. It was a girl. Her mouth moved like she was saying something. Then I was sitting on the ground talking to you. Dane started to shiver. Sighing, I removed my jumper and gave it to him. The cold against my skin felt like a razor blade. So, what do you think about our story so far? Did it chill you? It certainly spooked me. It's horrible to think about being stuck outside in the winter, with no hope for shelter except a run-down bathroom. Haunted or otherwise. Do you think the girl they're seeing is real, or are the kids imagining it? Can only homes be haunted, or are car parks, garages, and supermarkets also vulnerable to ghostly infestation? I'll say goodbye now and wish you a safe and cozy week. Join me again next week to learn what happens to Luca and his pod. Bye!